There's a feeling you get when you realize someone knows more than they're saying. Not the sharp kind of suspicion that keeps you awake at night. More like a slow hum beneath the surface, a quiet itch in the back of the mind that whispers, something's not adding up. That's how people started feeling about 3I Atlas. At first, it was just another strange visitor drifting through the solar system. The third confirmed interstellar object ever detected, moving so fast that no gravity could hold it. But then, tiny pieces of information began to appear and vanish again. Numbers changed. Images blurred. Reports from space telescopes disappeared from the public archive without explanation. It wasn't a scandal, it was silent. And in that silence, curiosity began to grow. NASA said everything was normal, that 3I Atlas was a rock and ice object passing harmlessly through space. But people watching the sky for themselves saw something else. They noticed the color first, that unmistakable green glow spreading like a living pulse through the coma around it. Then the way the light seemed to shift patterns every few hours, as if responding to something. The agency's press release called it a chemical reaction with ultraviolet light. But the timing was too neat. The color changes came right after a scheduled deep space communication window with the James Webb Space Telescope. Coincidence, maybe. But it was enough to make people look closer. One of them was Dr. Elena Khatri, an astrophysicist who had spent half her career studying comets. She was the kind of scientist who believed in truth that could be measured. Light curves, spectral lines, data that didn't change with moods or politics, and yet even she could feel it. That quiet tension in the air, that sense that someone was smoothing the edges of the story. One night in her office at the university, Elena sat staring at two data sets side by side on her screen. One was the public spectral reading of 3I Atlas released by NASA. The other was from a European observatory that had managed to record the same object an hour earlier. They didn't match. The European data showed an emission line that shouldn't exist. A thin band of frequency in the microwave range, faint but precise. NASA's version was identical except for one thing. The line was gone. No noise. Not instrument error. Deleted. Elena leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. She had seen data corrections before, but this was surgical. One frequency, cut clean. The kind of edit you make when you know exactly what you don't want people to see. She opened a secure channel to her colleague in Geneva. "What if that line wasn't a mistake?" she asked. The reply came a minute later. "It matches the hydrogen band," the message read. Exactly 1420 megahertz. Elena froze. That was the same frequency as the hydrogen line, the cosmic standard for radio communication, used in SETI searches for decades because it is the quietest channel in the universe. If someone or something wanted to speak so that others would understand, that's where they'd speak. She closed her laptop and looked through the window toward the night sky. Out there, past Mars and Jupiter, 3I Atlas was moving through space. Steady, silent, brighter than it should be, and for the first time in her career, she felt something she couldn't quantify. Not fear, not excitement, just a slow, steady realization that maybe the agency wasn't telling the whole story. Across the ocean, in a small town outside Perth, a group of amateur radio astronomers had been recording background noise from the sky for months. Their setup was simple. Salvage dishes from old television arrays linked to homemade signal processors. Most of the time they picked up nothing but static, the soft hiss of the cosmic microwave background. And one night they heard something else. A thin rising tone that cut through the noise like a needle through cloth, steady for 72 seconds, then gone. When they checked the source coordinates, their breath caught. It came from the exact position of 3I Atlas. They posted the data online as a tiny community forum buried under dozens of unread threads about meteor showers and lens calibration. But within a day, the post vanished. Not flagged. Not deleted by a moderator. Gone as if it had never been there. When they checked their servers, Their recordings were missing too. Only a single file remained, a corrupted audio clip containing one word in the metadata: restricted. By morning, NASA released a statement saying they'd been running a routine deep space calibration test and that the signal was a reflected transmission from one of their own satellites. A technical error, they called it. But no one had ever heard of a satellite transmitting on the hydrogen line. Not civilian ones. Not even classified military equipment. That band is forbidden for a reason. It's meant to stay quiet. Elena read the announcement and laughed under her breath. Not because she didn't believe in mistakes, but because she'd seen this pattern before. Every time something didn't fit, a statement appeared, neat and vague, as if someone was more concerned about calming people than telling them what was real. She closed the press page and looked at the data again. There it was. That tiny, perfect signal hidden in the noise, rising and falling like a heartbeat. Maybe it was a machine. Maybe it was just physics doing something we didn't understand yet. Or maybe, just maybe, someone out there was listening too. The next morning, Elena woke before sunrise. The lab was still and grey, the kind of silence that clings to glass before the world remembers to breathe. She poured coffee into a chipped mug and opened her laptop, her mind still replaying the signal, that faint, precise tone that shouldn't have existed. She opened the archived spectrograms again, tracing the small gap where NASA's data ended. Her own graph still showed the anomaly. It was there, bright and narrow, like a thin line drawn across the static. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. For hours, she compared timestamps, calibrations, and instruments. There was no glitch, no atmospheric interference. The reading was clean. If this had been noise, it would have spread unevenly across the range. But the line was sharp, too perfect. The more she looked, the clearer it became. The signal wasn't coming from the telescope. It was coming from the direction of 3I Atlas itself. At 9 a.m., her colleague in Geneva called again. The connection crackled with distance. "I checked with the French observatory," he said. "They logged the same band, but their database shows the entry as restricted too." "Who marked it that way?" she asked. "Someone with government access," he said. "Not the astronomers. It was tagged from outside their network." Elena's stomach sank. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Later that day, a quiet conversation began spreading through private research circles. Scientists passing along encrypted emails, untraceable attachments, whispers of missing data, and quiet instructions to stop asking questions. One note read simply, "The Atlas files are under review. Please refrain from external communication." Elena stared at that line for a long time. It didn't sound like a scientific review. It sounded like a lock. That night, she logged into an old, secure server, one she had used years ago when studying classified satellite imagery. The interface was outdated, but it still worked. She ran a search for 3I Atlas spectral logs. There was nothing. Then after a pause, a single entry appeared. "File restricted. Clearance level 7. She leaned back in her chair and whispered, "Level 7? That wasn't even in her clearance bracket. That was deep state clearance, the kind used for planetary defense and strategic intelligence. Since when did a comet fall under that category?" She closed the terminal, heart steady but heavy. There was only one reason a civilian agency would hide astronomical data under level 7 clearance. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was significant. Something about 3I Atlas mattered more than anyone had admitted. Across the Pacific, in a quiet apartment in Perth, one of the amateur astronomers, a man named Leo, sat hunched over his desk, replaying fragments of their vanished recordings. He couldn't recover the original signal. It was gone. But something odd remained in the noise. Faint electromagnetic fluctuations that pulsed in regular intervals. He adjusted the gain, filtered out static, and played the file again. The tone returned, soft, distant, rhythmic. But this time, as he slowed it down, he realized something strange. Between each pulse was an echo, not a reflection, but a mirrored pattern, inverted and repeating. A signal and its response. He ran the recording through software that translated frequency into visual form. On his screen, the wave transformed into a pattern, peaks and troughs bending into shapes.
And there it was again, unmistakable, a spiral.
The same golden pattern that had appeared in earlier resonance readings of the hum. He stared at it for a long time. Then he sent an encrypted message to a contact he'd never spoken to before, a journalist known for investigating missing NASA data logs. The subject line was simple. They erased the wrong file. Days turned into weeks. By the end of the month, Elena's inbox was full of untraceable messages, some from anonymous scientists, others from engineers, claiming to have worked with the space agency's communication arrays. Each said the same thing in slightly different ways, that 3I Atlas wasn't behaving like a comet at all. One note read, "There's structure inside the emission band, too symmetrical to be gas. Looks like modulation." Another said, "Web-recorded pulse intervals that align with radio window shifts. They didn't want us to publish it." And one message, the one that made her hand shake slightly when she read it, came from an IP traced to a NASA data center. "We're not lying.
We're protecting you."
It's not ready yet. She sat staring at the screen, her heart slow, steady.
What could it be?
The next night, Elena met with Leo on a secure video channel. He looked tired. Dark circles under his eyes, the background of his room filled with tangled wires and a small dish antenna aimed out the window. He showed her his recovered signal, the spiral pattern, pulsing like a heartbeat. "I know what this looks like," he said, "but the shape isn't random. It matches a mathematical ratio. The Fibonacci curve." Elena nodded. "The same ratio that appears in biological growth, planetary storms, even galaxies." "Exactly," he said. "And that's not all. The signal repeats every 72 seconds, same as the wow signal." Her eyes widened.
"From 1977? He nodded.
"Yeah, different direction back then, Sagittarius. But if you map Atlas's current trajectory, it passes right through that same region. It lines up." Elena leaned closer to the camera. "You're saying it's connected?"
"I'm saying it might have been the same source," he said. "And now it's here."
She sat in silence for a long moment, letting the weight of that idea sink in. A single object moving through interstellar space, maybe for billions of years, passing near our solar system once before, long enough to send a signal that sparked decades of debate, and now returning, carrying a message we were too distracted to hear. Maybe it wasn't about aliens at all.
Maybe it was just recognition.
Something seeing us the way we saw it. But then another question rose, quiet but persistent. If NASA knew this, if they'd seen the same patterns, the same modulation, why hide it? Why edit it out of the data? She could think of two reasons. Either they were afraid of being wrong, or they were afraid of being right. In the following days, Leo's forum went offline. His account disappeared. His IP address was rerouted through dozens of proxies. No one knew where he'd gone. Elena tried to reach him but got nothing. No reply, no trace. And then, late one night, she received one last encrypted email. No sender, no signature. Just a file attachment labeled Atlas Return Mover. When she opened it, the screen filled with static, then slowly resolved into an image of the night sky filmed through a telescope. There it was, 3I Atlas, still glowing green, still impossibly steady. But as she watched, something happened. The green faded to white, then faintly, for only a few seconds, a series of small, regular flashes appeared along its edge, 12 in total, before fading again into darkness. She played it again. 12 flashes, same spacing, same rhythm, a pattern, a reply. She whispered to herself almost without thinking. They didn't lie to protect themselves. They lied to protect us. Then she closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and looked out the window toward the stars, the place where truth never stayed hidden for long. Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat on the couch with her laptop open, staring at the faint reflection of herself on the dark screen. Outside her window, the sky over Chile was black and still. She could see the faint shimmer of the desert stars, the same sky she'd fallen in love with as a child. The sky had never lied to her before, but people did. She opened the Atlas return file again, replaying the same 12 flashes over and over. 1, 2, 3, 12. Then silence. The lights were too regular to be random, too slow to be from rotation, and too evenly spaced to be a glitch. Each flash was almost identical in brightness and timing. That level of precision in deep space didn't happen by accident. She wrote a note in her logbook. Flashes observed, 12. Duration, 3 seconds each. Pattern, constant.
No visible shift.
Possible communication attempt or energy discharge. She leaned back and whispered to herself, "If this is a message, what are they trying to say?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before typing something new. If NASA knew, why suppress it? And then for the first time she felt something new. Not just curiosity, but anger. The next morning, she logged into an old university network. It was a quiet digital corner of the world, built before the era of commercial research, before every discovery had a sponsor. She accessed a section that stored raw astronomical archives, the kind of data that had been copied and forgotten by time. She searched 3i Atlas early observation logs. Nothing. Then she tried non-public, and a small encrypted folder appeared. She smiled faintly. Sometimes the truth didn't hide behind firewalls. It hid behind old code no one remembered to delete. The folder was labeled Atlas Spectra Raw. She opened the first file. It contained early light readings from the comet, just wavelengths, color bands, and raw timestamps. For hours, she scrolled through numbers, comparing columns. Most of it looked normal: hydrogen, oxygen, traces of CO2. But deep in the file, buried under harmless data, she saw something strange. A repeating value that didn't belong. It appeared exactly every 72 seconds. 72. The same as the signal Leo had mentioned. Her hand trembled slightly as she copied the data into a new sheet and ran a spectral transform. The graph formed slowly, lines curving and bending, until a faint, repeating structure appeared. A sinusoidal wave overlaid with something almost geometric. She adjusted the contrast, and there it was again in the spiral. The same Fibonacci curve. The pattern wasn't just a coincidence. It was embedded directly in the light. She leaned back in her chair, whispering, "You're hiding in the glow, aren't you?" That evening, she decided to test something. She synchronized the timestamps of the spectral data with the telescope footage in Atlas Return. Move it as each flash from the video lined up perfectly with a spike in the spiral wave pattern. The two data sets matched, visual light and radio frequency pulsing in rhythm. "It was out there," she murmured softly. "You're broadcasting on every layer at once." She sent a quiet message to a trusted friend at the European Space Agency. She didn't say much, just, "Have you checked for synchronized emissions across optical and radio frequencies from 3i Atlas? It's there. You just have to look in the gaps." The reply came 6 hours later. "We looked. And yes, there's alignment. But don't send this through official channels. We're being watched." For the next few nights, Elena couldn't stop working. She barely ate, barely slept. Each hour, she uncovered something stranger. She noticed that after every 12th flash, there was a gap, precisely 6 minutes and 24 seconds long, before the cycle began again. She overlaid the time intervals on a grid and realized something remarkable. Each sequence followed a mathematical progression, one that mirrored a sequence found in quantum harmonic resonance. To anyone else, it might have looked like random cosmic behavior. But to Elena, who had spent her life studying patterns in chaos, it felt like a whisper. She thought about Leonardo da Vinci's sketches of motion, about Fibonacci's numbers hidden in seashells and storms. Nature always spoke in patterns, but it never repeated with machine-like precision.
Atlas was repeating perfectly. She sat very still and whispered to herself, "That's not a comet."
The next day, she decided to contact an old colleague, Dr. Chen, who had once worked on NASA's Deep Signal Interpretation project. It was an internal experiment meant to study unidentified transmissions from deep space, mostly static and pulsar noise. The project had gone dark years ago. When she finally reached him, his voice was quiet and tired. "Elena," he said softly, "how did you get this number?"
"I found something in the Atlas data."
It's structured, repeating.
"It matches an old signal, the one from Sagittarius."
He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You shouldn't have looked at that data." "Why not?" she asked. "Because it wasn't meant to be public. There are layers to what you think you know. NASA didn't lie because they're evil. They lied because they were told to."
"Told by who?"
she asked. He sighed. "You know that big new array they built out near Canberra? The one that listens for solar anomalies?" "Yes. It's not listening to the sun," he said. "It's listening for replies." Her breath caught. "Replies to what?" He paused again, then whispered, "To the message we sent." That night, she sat on the balcony of her small apartment, looking up at the stars. The air was cool and thin, the desert stretching out like an ocean of silence below her. Somewhere out there among the stars, an object was moving. Not just drifting, but moving with intent. She thought about what Chen had said. If NASA had sent a message first, maybe Atlas wasn't the beginning.
Maybe it was the answer.
She closed her eyes and imagined a world where humanity had already reached out, where someone in a conference room had decided that the universe deserved a knock on its door. And what if, after all these years, something had finally knocked back? The thought filled her not with fear, but with awe. Maybe NASA's secret wasn't that they had found aliens, but that they'd been waiting for them all along. The next morning, Elena received another encrypted message. It had no subject, no sender, and no text. Just a single file. She hesitated before opening it, her pulse steady but slow. When she finally clicked play, the screen turned black for a moment. Then an audio waveform appeared, slow and steady.
A low hum began to play, deep and constant, like the distant vibration of the earth. Then, faintly, beneath the hum, she heard 12 tones. Not random, not static.
Tones forming a pattern. She watched as the waveform pulsed in rhythm. 12 notes, then silence. Then again, she recognized it instantly. The same intervals as the flashes. But this time, as the last tone faded, a faint voice came through. It wasn't human, but it wasn't just noise either. It was soft, almost melodic, like speech filtered through 1,000 miles of air. She slowed the playback, adjusted the frequency, and for a brief second the voice formed something like words, 3 short syllables, and it sounded eerily close to "We see you."
Elena froze.
The hum faded into silence. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. She closed the file, leaned back in her chair, and whispered to herself. NASA wasn't hiding the truth. They were hiding the contact. Far away, in an underground data facility in Maryland, a small team of engineers watched a line of code scroll across their monitor. The signal from Atlas had just pulsed again, right on time. One of them sighed and said quietly, "It's starting phase 2. The other replied, "Does she know?" The first engineer shook his head. "She's about to." The morning sunlight spilled gently through the thin curtains of Elena's apartment, but she barely noticed it. She hadn't slept. The audio clip still echoed in her mind. "We see you." It played again and again in her thoughts, not like a threat, but like recognition. Someone or something was answering. And if that was true, then NASA's silence wasn't protection. It was controlled. She sat at her desk, sipping a cup of cold coffee, scrolling through messages that hadn't been read. There were no new responses from Chen, no updates from the European team, just static quiet. She glanced again at the encrypted file. It wasn't just the sound that bothered her. It was the timestamp. The recording had been logged 2 days before NASA's official statement, denying any unusual emissions from 3i Atlas. 2 days before the denial, they already had proof, she whispered. So you knew? The thought was strange, not angry, not surprised, just tired. Because deep down, she understood. Humanity always looked for control in chaos. When something beyond comprehension appeared, the instinct was to bury it. By noon, she packed her bag and left the apartment. The air in the desert was sharp and dry, carrying the faint hum of distant power lines. Her destination was the observatory outpost near La Silla, a quiet facility tucked into the hills, far from cities or noise. As her car wound along the dusty road, the sky above her widened, stretching into that endless blue that made the ground feel small. Somewhere out there above the clouds, 3i Atlas was still glowing, still pulsing. At the observatory gate, an old guard recognized her immediately. "Dr. Khatri," he said, leaning against the doorframe.
Didn't think we'd see you again.
"I needed a place with silence," she said softly. He smiled faintly and nodded her through. Inside, the control room was quiet except for the low hum of cooling fans. She connected her laptop to the data feed and began searching through archived radio logs. Most of the recordings were blank, the kind of background noise that filled most of the universe. But she wasn't looking for noise. She was looking for that tone. She found it 3 hours later. It was faint, buried under layers of static. But when she isolated the wavelength, 1420 megahertz, the same pattern appeared. 12 pulses, then silence. Except this time, there was more. A second sequence followed immediately after, shorter, faster, almost like an echo. She played it on loop, closing her eyes, letting the rhythm sink in. The first series was steady, spaced like a calm heartbeat. The second was higher in frequency, rapid, jittery, like a response. 2 patterns. 2 senders. Her breath caught.
It's a conversation, she whispered.
She reached for her notebook, sketching the pulse sequence by hand. 1 long pattern, 1 short. 1 voice, 1 reply. The spacing was consistent, no randomness, no drift. Someone was talking, and someone else was answering. But who? As evening settled in, she left the observatory and sat outside beneath the desert sky. The sun had slipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in soft orange and violet. The stars began to appear one by one, like scattered thoughts taking shape. She took a slow breath and whispered to herself, "If they're communicating, what are they saying?" The wind moved gently across the sand, whispering through the dry grass. Somewhere far above, 3i Atlas was gliding between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, steady as ever. Her phone buzzed. A message from Chen, just coordinates. No text. She opened a map and frowned. The coordinates pointed to a facility in Australia near Canberra, the Deep Space Network Array. She stared at it for a moment, her pulse slow but firm. That was the same site Chen had mentioned, the one that wasn't listening for the sun. She sent back one word, "Why?" The reply came minutes later. Because it started transmitting. 2 days later, Elena was on a flight to Sydney. From there, she rented a small white car and drove inland. The landscape shifted from city lights to empty plains, red dirt and scattered brush stretching to the horizon. By sunset, the road led her to the edge of the Deep Space Network compound, a cluster of massive radio dishes tilted toward the sky. They stood silent against the fading light, each one gleaming white in the dusk. A security guard met her at the gate. "Identification, please," he said politely. She handed him a small card. "Visiting researcher," she said, hoping the quiet confidence in her tone would do the rest. He glanced at the badge, hesitated, then waved her through. "Don't touch anything," he said, smiling faintly. Inside the main control room, a handful of technicians sat at their consoles, the glow from the monitors reflecting softly across their faces. The atmosphere was calm, almost too calm, like a library where every whisper mattered. Elena walked quietly to the back of the room and stood behind a young operator. The screen showed a slow, scrolling graph, a live feed of the deep space signal spectrum. She leaned slightly closer. "That line," she said, pointing. "What's that spike near 1420? The operator hesitated. "Background noise," he said quickly. "Just cosmic interference." She smiled faintly. "It's not background noise if it repeats every 72 seconds. He turned to look at her, startled. "You shouldn't know that."
"And show me why I'm wrong," she said softly.
He looked around, then sighed.
"Follow me."
He led her through a corridor lined with old photographs of Apollo missions and early communication arrays. At the end was a locked metal door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The operator swiped his badge and the door clicked open. The room inside was small, dimly lit, filled with racks of servers humming quietly. At the center stood a single monitor displaying a waveform.
Elena recognized it immediately. 12 pulses, then the echo.
The operator lowered his voice. "We've been receiving this signal for the last 48 hours. It's coming from 3i Atlas, but it's not reflected by radiation. It's an active transmission. From the object itself?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, and something's answering." Her heart pounded softly, though her voice stayed calm. "From where?" He turned the monitor toward her.
"Earth." Elena's lips parted slightly. "That's impossible," she said.
The operator pointed at the display. "The reply originates from this array."
"From right here."
She stared at the data. One signal leaving, one returning, perfectly synchronized. The outgoing signal was weaker, encoded. The returning signal was stronger, clearer. The array wasn't just listening. It was talking back. "Who authorized this?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then whispered, "No one. The transmission code is locked. We can't access the command line. It started automatically after the first inbound pulse." She stepped closer, watching the faint glow of the monitor reflect in her eyes. "It's self-synchronizing," she murmured, "like it's running its own handshake protocol."
"Exactly," he said.
"And that's not possible unless the system was pre-programmed to respond," she finished. They both stood in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the servers. Then softly, Elena said, "NASA didn't just hide the contact. They prepared for it." The operator looked at her uneasily. If that's true, then someone knew this was coming long before 3i Atlas arrived. She nodded slowly. Maybe that's what the wow signal was.
"A warning, not a greeting."
He swallowed. "What do we do now?" Elena looked back at the data. The pulses had just restarted. 12 flashes, then a pause. But this time, the reply from Earth came half a second faster. She whispered, "It's learning." Outside, the massive dishes of the Canberra array began to shift almost imperceptibly, adjusting their angles toward the stars. And far beyond them, in the deep dark between Jupiter and Mars, something moved. Slow, deliberate, steady. Elena stayed long after the operator left, the room faintly lit by the cool blue of the monitors. The hum of the servers was steady, soft, almost like breathing. Each pulse on the screen came in pairs, 12 beats, then 12 echoes, the rhythm filling the space between her thoughts. The pattern didn't feel random anymore. It felt organized, alive. She pulled a small notebook from her bag and began writing down the pulse intervals by hand. Not just the count, but the exact spacing between them. 72 seconds for the first sequence, 72 for the reply. Perfect symmetry. But when she zoomed in, something else caught her eye. The tiniest variations, almost imperceptible, in the length of each pulse. It wasn't perfect repetition. It was encoding. She frowned softly, running her finger along the graph. "You're saying something, aren't you?" she whispered. And as soon as she said it, the next pulse flickered across the screen, brighter than the rest, a little longer, almost like acknowledgement. She leaned closer, her breath quiet. The air felt heavier now, as if the room itself was listening. By dawn, she had converted the pulse sequence into binary. The numbers looked messy at first, a meaningless series of ones and zeros, but the pattern repeated in structured blocks like grouped sentences. She imported it into her laptop and began decoding. The first few lines turned up empty. Then one group resolved into something familiar. ASCII characters. Letters. She froze when she read the first word. Hello. It could have been noise, coincidence, a false positive. But when the second sequence followed, "You hear us," she stopped doubting. She looked up at the server racks, her reflection dim in the glass, and whispered, "Yes." The monitor blinked softly. Another pulse appeared.
Then another.
This time, the decoded block was longer. The letters spilled slowly onto the screen. Remember the first signal. We return. Her heartbeat slowed. The first signal, she murmured. The wow signal. Her hand trembled slightly as she typed a short command to continue capturing incoming transmissions. The words appeared one line at a time. "We see you. You built the ears. We listen too." Her throat tightened. "Who are you?" she whispered. There was no immediate reply. The next few pulses came through empty, just static. And then after a full minute of silence, the last line decoded. "We are what you were." She sat motionless for a long time. The hum of the machines blurred into the background, blending with the faint wind outside. Every logical part of her mind wanted to dismiss it. A trick of software, random binary coincidence, something explainable. But deep down, beneath the training and skepticism, another feeling stirred, not fear, not disbelief, but something older. Recognition. She opened her notebook and began writing again, her pen moving steadily. "They're not saying they're aliens," she wrote. "They're saying they're connected to us." Her gaze lifted toward the high ceiling, where thin streaks of dawn light cut through the vents. The idea was absurd, but so was the silence that followed the wow signal for almost 50 years. Maybe it hadn't been random. Maybe it had been an introduction, one that had taken half a century to reach its next chapter.
And NASA, maybe they had known that all along.
By mid-morning, the control room began to fill with other staff. Technicians, engineers, supervisors. They nodded politely to her but didn't ask questions. The hum of activity grew, keyboards clicking, quiet voices trading data. One of the senior analysts approached. "Dr. Khatri," he said softly, "we've been asked to move all Atlas logs to offline storage. Headquarters wants them sealed until review." Her stomach turned slightly. "Who gave that order?" He hesitated. "It came from Langley." "But they said it's just for security." "Security from what?" He didn't answer. He just gave a tight smile and walked away. Elena waited until he was gone, then copied the signal data from the array server onto a small encrypted drive in her pocket. She didn't know why, only that she couldn't let it vanish again. That evening, she left the facility quietly and drove back toward the coast. The sunset followed her in the mirrors, pale gold, soft crimson. The road curved between low hills covered in dry grass. Every now and then she glanced up at the sky. The first stars were already visible, faint but steady. She pulled over near an empty stretch of land and stepped out of the car. The horizon was silent. The wind moved gently through the trees. She looked up and whispered, "If you're really there, show me." Nothing moved at first, just the slow shimmer of the night. Then, faintly, a flicker. A single green light in the distance, small but distinct. She smiled to herself, almost sadly. "I thought so." The light pulsed once, then twice,
Then 12 times.
She counted under her breath, each number soft like a prayer. After the 12th flash, the night went still again. When she returned to her apartment later, she uploaded the decoded message into her analysis software, layering it against old radio records, including one from 1977. The frequency matched perfectly. But more than that, the data modulation was identical. The same pattern, the same hand behind the signal. The difference was in the metadata. In 1977, the origin had been deep space. This time, the return ping had coordinates closer than any she expected, less than 1 astronomical unit away, within the solar system. She traced the coordinates again and stared at the map. It wasn't near Jupiter anymore. wasn't even in the asteroid belt. 3i Atlas had slowed down. She whispered the thought aloud, letting it sink into the silence of the room. You stopped moving. Then another realization followed, cold and quiet. The trajectory meant that it was shifting position relative to Earth's orbit.
It wasn't passing through.
It was waiting. Her phone buzzed, an encrypted call. She answered without speaking.
"Elena," a voice said on the other end.
It was Chen, his tone sharp but hushed. "Don't open your door. They're coming for the drives." Her breath caught. "Who?" "NASA, or what's left of it."
"They've traced the leak."
"They know you have the signal logs." She stepped to the window. Outside, the street was empty, or no cars, no movement. But she could hear something faint, distant, like the hum of engines idling.
"Chen," she said quietly, "the signal changed. It's not random."
"They're communicating." "I know," he said. "That's why they're scared." The line clicked, then went dead. Elena stood there for a long moment, holding her phone against her chest. The hum outside grew louder. A pair of headlights turned the corner and slowed near her building. She backed away from the window, heart beating slow but heavy. Then she walked calmly to her desk, picked up the encrypted drive, and slipped it into the lining of her coat. If they wanted to hide the truth again, she wasn't going to make it easy. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the night. The air smelled faintly of rain. The wind moved softly across the street, carrying the same rhythm she'd come to recognize. 12 beats, a pause, 12 again. She looked up once more at the sky. Somewhere out there among the quiet stars, 3i Atlas waited. Steady, patient, glowing green. She whispered, "I hear you." And for a moment, though she knew it was impossible, she swore she saw one more flicker. Soft, distant, almost like a nod.
Elena didn't sleep that night.
She drove aimlessly for hours, following the coastline until the road turned to gravel. The horizon was a soft grey ribbon, the sea beyond it whispering in long breaths. Every few miles, she looked up through the windshield, half expecting to see the green flicker again. But the sky was quiet. The stars hung still, scattered like cold dust. She finally stopped near a stretch of old radio towers, long abandoned by the military decades ago. Their silhouettes rose into the dawn like bones of forgotten giants. It was here, surrounded by silence, that she decided to set up her laptop again. She knew it wasn't safe. If NASA had already flagged her connection, every packet of data might be traceable. But she couldn't shake the thought that they were still sending. And maybe, if she could listen from somewhere remote enough, somewhere cut off from the noise of cities, she might hear what no one else could. She opened her software, tuned the receiver to the same frequency, the one she knew by heart now, and waited. The speakers hissed quietly. Minutes passed. Then a faint pulse emerged. Soft, deliberate, evenly spaced. Her heart slowed to its rhythm.
1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. It wasn't the 12-beat pattern anymore.
It had changed. She leaned closer to the screen. The graph scrolled in steady lines, the same narrow-band frequency, but the modulation was thicker, more layered, as if multiple signals overlapped, forming chords instead of single notes. She saved the raw stream and began separating the layers manually. The first few filters produced nothing but static. Then from the fourth channel, a new sequence appeared. Binary again, but this time the bits came grouped into clusters of 6. When she converted it, the numbers didn't match any text encoding she recognized. It wasn't ASCII, it wasn't Unicode. It wasn't anything built for human language. She tried plotting the numbers on a graph instead. A pattern took shape, arcs, loops, repeating spirals. At first, she thought it was noise. But when she rotated the image, she froze. It was a map. Not a map of the solar system as we knew it, but of orbital paths, intricate overlapping, tracing through a region that wasn't centered on the sun. She checked the coordinates, compared them against known star charts. The central point of the map wasn't a star at all. It was an empty region, a patch of interstellar space where nothing visible existed. But there, At the edge of the pattern was a familiar symbol. 3 curved arcs intersecting at an angle of 45 degrees. The same geometric configuration that appeared in one of NASA's old mission patches. From Voyager 1. Her pulse quickened. She remembered that Voyager had carried the golden record, humanity's greeting to the cosmos. Music, languages, images of life on Earth. And now, decades later, something or someone was sending back a reply. She pressed record, capturing the entire transmission. A low hum vibrated through the radio tower's frame, barely audible but steady enough to feel. The metal skeleton around her seemed to resonate like an enormous tuning fork. Then another pulse came through, stronger than before. She decoded it and watched as new words appeared across the screen. You left your voice in the dark. Her breath caught.
A second line followed. We found it. We made it our own. She whispered, almost to herself. They found the Voyager record.
The signal continued, smooth and deliberate. You spoke first. Now we speak back. Hours passed as she listened, transcribing everything by hand as the sun climbed higher. The more she decoded, the stranger the messages became. Fragments of English woven with alien syntax, symbols that resembled molecular diagrams, musical notes encoded as numbers. It wasn't just communication. It was a transmission of memory. Some sections described star systems she couldn't identify, blue dwarfs surrounded by frozen clouds, nebulae shaped like spirals, planets with rings of dust glowing green. Others sounded almost poetic, speaking of light that walks across the void and time that sleeps inside atoms. And woven between the lines were more references to us, to humanity,
to Earth. We watched your eyes open. We saw you learn fire. We remember being you. She sat back.
Her body still, her mind floating somewhere between awe and disbelief. If it was real, if any of this was real, then this wasn't just an alien intelligence. It was something older. Something that remembered our beginnings as if they had witnessed the same dawn, or worse, as if they were part of it. Her laptop chimed suddenly, an alert. The local Wi-Fi network had connected automatically to a nearby router. She frowned. There shouldn't have been any signal out here. The nearest town was over 40 miles away. She opened her network list. One connection stood out. It was labeled simply NASA Backlink 01. Her blood ran cold. The signal icon flickered, showing data traffic. Someone was accessing her machine remotely. She reached forward to disconnect, but before she could, a message box appeared on the screen.
No sender ID, just one line of text. Stop, you're not cleared for this. Her hands froze on the keyboard.
Then another message. We see you, Elena. You are putting people at risk. She took a slow breath, her pulse steady but deep.
Who is this?
She whispered. The cursor blinked.
We are the Division. This is a containment order. Power down your device immediately. She hesitated, then typed back. Containment of what?
A pause, then the reply, of them. She stared at the word. Small, simple, terrifying in its vagueness. The hum of the tower changed pitch. Low, vibrating against her chest. Outside, the air shimmered faintly as if heated by invisible light. The radio signal spiked, flooding her screen with static.
Her software crashed.
And then through the speakers, a new voice came through. Not typed, not encoded, spoken. A calm, synthetic tone, layered and distant, yet perfectly clear. Dr. Elena Khatri. She froze.
We told you to stop.
Her heart pounded, but she didn't speak. The voice continued, slow and deliberate. You do not understand what you have awakened. The object you call 3i Atlas is not what you think. It was not built to explore. It was built to remember. Elena swallowed hard. Who are you? We are the Watchers, the voice said. The ones who found it first. We've been protecting your kind from what's inside. The signal stuttered, like a breath caught mid-sentence, and then another tone overlaid it, softer, deeper, not human. "We are not inside," the second voice said. "We are home!" Static erupted through the speakers. The lights flickered. Elena yanked the laptop's power cable free. The sound cut off instantly, leaving only the hum of the sea and the whisper of wind between the towers. Her reflection in the dark screen stared back, pale, tired, terrified, but still listening. Somewhere far above, unseen by human eyes, 3i Atlas drifted silently through the black. It was no longer just passing through. It was waking up. The sky over the desert was pale now, the color of cold dust. The radio towers stood silent, their long shadows stretching west. Elena sat in the driver's seat of her car, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup gone cold hours ago. Her laptop sat closed beside her. She hadn't dared turn it on again. But the sound, that low thrumming pulse, hadn't gone away. It lingered faintly in her ears, like the echo of a heartbeat. Even when the wind stopped, she could still feel it through the ground, a vibration deep and patient, as if something vast was breathing beneath the surface of the world. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. The messages from the division still haunted her. Were they NASA, military, or something entirely different? A shadow branch buried beneath the official layers. Whoever they were, they'd known her name, her location, her work, and they'd said something she couldn't forget. "We've been protecting your kind from what's inside."
Inside what?
The words repeated in her mind, again and again. She opened her notebook, the one she kept hidden even from her university logs, and began to write.
Every detail, the signals, the map, the transmission about Voyager, everything she decoded before the shutdown.
She didn't know if she'd ever get to publish it, but she needed to keep it somewhere tangible, somewhere safe from being erased. At the top of the page, she wrote, 3i Atlas, the object that shouldn't exist. Later that evening, she drove into the nearby town, a quiet coastal village where the air always smelled of brine and diesel fuel. The locals were used to fishermen and long-haul drivers, not visiting astronomers. She parked near a diner and slipped inside, ordering black coffee she wouldn't drink. A television above the counter played muted news highlights. A familiar blue and white banner scrolled across the bottom. NASA releases new 3i Atlas data. Her heart skipped. She asked the waitress to turn up the sound. The anchor's voice filled the room. NASA officials have issued a statement regarding the interstellar object 3i Atlas, clarifying recent reports of unusual emissions as a data processing error. According to agency representatives, all previous spectral anomalies were the result of sensor drift caused by solar interference. Elena leaned forward.
"That's a lie," she murmured.
The agency confirmed no evidence of metallic vaporization or anomalous signal output. The object remains on a stable hyperbolic trajectory and poses no threat to Earth. Further updates are expected next week following data recalibration from the Webb telescope. The screen faded to a smiling meteorologist talking about an approaching storm. She sat back, jaw tightening. They were rewriting the record. The public version of 3i Atlas had already changed. The nickel emissions, the radio interference, the carbon dioxide spike, all gone. Reclassified as processing errors. Someone inside NASA had hit delete on the truth. That night, she booked a room in a small inn overlooking the harbor. Old fishing boats rocked quietly against the tide. The reflection of the moon shimmered on the black water, split into 1,000 trembling lines. Elena sat by the window, laptop open but disconnected from any network. She worked offline, decoding what she could from the partial files she'd saved before the interference. Each fragment of the transmission seemed to contain layers, like code folded within code. The surface data formed those poetic sentences, the ones that seemed almost human in tone. But beneath that text, patterns of frequency and amplitude hinted at something more, like a carrier wave piggybacking on top of the message. She filtered out the linguistic layer, amplifying what was left. The result was a long series of harmonic pulses rising and falling in gentle arcs. She played them through her headphones, eyes closed.
It was beautiful. Not mechanical or random, but rhythmic, melodic, almost like music.
Not composed for ears like ours, but still full of structure and symmetry. And in that sound she heard something, a sense of intent.
As if whoever had built 3i Atlas hadn't just sent data.
They had sent a song.
Around midnight, her phone buzzed. A message, unknown number.
She hesitated, then opened it. If you want to know the truth, come to Building 6. Bring no devices.
No signature. Her stomach tightened.
She searched the local map. There was a Building 6, an abandoned research facility outside town. It had been part of an atmospheric monitoring project shut down years ago, supposedly because of funding cuts. She'd driven past it earlier that week, a long concrete structure surrounded by rusting fences and wild grass. She considered deleting the message.
It could be a trap.
But curiosity gnawed at her like hunger. She packed her notebook, left the laptop behind, and drove into the night. The facility sat beneath the cliffs, half buried in fog. Its faded letters, Pacific Monitoring Station 6, were barely visible above the entrance. One of the front doors hung loose on its hinges. Elena stepped inside. Her flashlight beam cut through dust and silence. Old cables dangled from the ceiling. The air smelled of metal and damp stone. Then she heard a faint hum, that same low vibration she'd felt earlier under the radio towers. "Hello?" she called softly. A voice answered from the shadows. "You came."
A man stepped into view. Middle-aged, clean-shaven, wearing a field jacket with no insignia.
His eyes were tired but steady. "Who are you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Someone who used to work for them. You can call me Carter." "The division?" He nodded once. "That's what we called ourselves. But don't think of it as NASA, not exactly. More like a fracture within it. A part of the agency that never made it onto any official chart." "What is 3i Atlas?" she asked quietly. He studied her for a long moment. "You already know it's not just a comet."
"I know the data was scrubbed," she said.
"I know they erased the nickel, the carbon dioxide ratios, the signals, and you're wondering why," he finished for her. "'Cause you think NASA's lying."
"Isn't it?" he sighed.
"Not lying, containing." Her brow furrowed. "Containing what?" Carter walked to an old terminal in the corner of the room. It was still powered, faint light flickering across its cracked monitor. He typed a few commands and an image appeared, a black and white photograph of a glowing sphere suspended in space, surrounded by faint tendrils of gas. "This is 3i Atlas, taken before the official discovery date," he said. "This image was classified for over 6 months. Do you see the halo pattern?" She nodded. "It's symmetrical." "Exactly, too symmetrical. No natural comet produces that kind of geometric uniformity. The energy readings were unlike anything we'd seen."
That's when we knew it wasn't just passing through.
He zoomed in on the image until the halo filled the screen. Tiny filaments curved in repeating arcs, almost like circuitry. "Atlas isn't a rock," he said quietly. "It's a construct." Elena stared at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You mean—"
"It's built?"
Carter looked up. "Yes, but not by us." He pulled a small metallic object from his pocket. A triangular shard, no larger than a coin, dull grey with faintly etched lines. "This," he said, setting it on the table, "was recovered from the upper atmosphere a month after 3i Atlas entered the system. It burned up before re-entry, but fragments survived. Every lab that tested it reported the same result. Unknown composite, isotopic ratios that don't match anything on Earth or in meteorite samples." Elena leaned closer. The etchings shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light, forming tiny repeating triangles. "What is it made of?" Carter shook his head. "We don't know. But whatever it is, it reacts to radio frequencies. When we exposed it to the signal you intercepted, it resonated." He switched on a small transmitter, dialing to a low frequency. The shard began to hum softly, glowing with a pale green hue.
Her eyes widened.
It's responding. Exactly. It's part of something larger. The rest of it is out there, still intact, drifting beyond Mars. He looked at her, his expression heavy. And NASA's not lying to the public to hide aliens, Dr. Khatri. They're lying because they don't know how to stop what's coming. Elena stared at the shard, its glow pulsing in time with some distant rhythm, as if answering a call from the stars. Somewhere, far above the Earth, 3i Atlas turned silently, its green light flickering across the dark expanse. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't moving through space at all.
Maybe it was waiting.
The glow from the shard faded slowly, like an ember retreating into ash. The hum lingered in the air for several seconds before dissolving into silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound seemed to leave a space behind it, a kind of ringing absence. Elena finally broke the stillness. "How long have you known?" Carter didn't look at her. His gaze stayed fixed on the shard. "Too long."
"Longer than anyone on the outside realizes, do."
He leaned back against the table. The official story says 3i Atlas was discovered last July. But the truth is, NASA logged its first detection more than 9 months earlier.
Her eyes widened. 9 months? He nodded.
It was faint then, too faint for public observation. But the deep space scanners caught its trajectory early. It wasn't on any predicted path. It came from beyond the galactic plane at a velocity that should have shredded it to dust.
Except it didn't. He rubbed his hands together as if warming them against memories.
The first data looked like noise, but when one of our team analysts applied a pattern search, it started repeating. The repetition wasn't natural. It was timed. That's how they realized they weren't looking at a comet at all. They were looking at a signal generator. Elena frowned. "You're saying it was transmitting before it entered the solar system?" "Yes," Carter said, "and the direction of that signal was Earth." The words hung between them. Elena felt her breath catch in her chest. "It was aimed at us?" Carter gave a slow nod. "Not by chance. We cross-referenced its orientation vectors. The alignment stayed constant, even as it approached. The object was adjusting its spin to keep the signal focused here." She felt a quiet tremor rise in her throat.
"Then why hide it?"
"Why not tell the world something that big?" "Because they couldn't explain it," Carter said simply. "And you don't announce what you can't explain." He moved closer to the flickering terminal. But it wasn't just the transmission. The structure of the object itself, that's where things really started to unravel. When the Webb telescope got its first readings, we noticed something strange about the thermal map. The heat signature wasn't random. It formed a pattern, radial lines converging toward a central void. Elena pictured it in her mind, like spokes of a wheel around a hollow hub. "A reactor?" she asked.
"That was our guess," he said softly.
"But when we modeled the energy distribution, it didn't match any propulsion system we know. The heat wasn't coming from combustion or fusion. It was coming from coherence." She blinked. "You mean like a laser?" "Closer to that than a rocket, yes, but at a scale that shouldn't exist. It was channeling energy through structured matter, a kind of lattice that converts radiation directly into motion. The geometry was perfect, too perfect for chance." He paused, watching her expression shift from curiosity to awe.
"You see why they couldn't go public?"
Elena stepped closer to the shard, the faint etched triangles gleaming under the light. "If this is a piece of it," she said, "then it's not just a comet. It's a machine." Carter smiled faintly, not in pride, but in resignation.
"That's the word none of us wanted to say."
She looked at him sharply. "Then what is it doing here?"
"That's the other secret," he said.
The one they buried under 5 levels of classification. He walked to a filing cabinet against the wall, pried it open, and pulled out a sealed folder. Inside were high-resolution images, spectral scans, telemetry graphs, and handwritten notes. He spread them across the table. These were taken by the James Webb Space Telescope 3 weeks before the official discovery. The data was classified before it even reached the public servers. He pointed to one of the images on a spectral line graph full of jagged peaks. That's the emission data from the object's core.
Notice anything?
Elena leaned closer. Those harmonics, they're evenly spaced. Exactly. It's too regular to be random. When we converted the intervals into sound frequencies, the waveform formed repeating intervals of 12 and 8.
Her eyes widened.
Musical ratios? Yes. Carter's voice softened. And when one of our team members, a mathematician named Julian, overlaid the sequence onto the Fibonacci curve, it fit perfectly. The waveform wasn't just sound. It was a mathematical composition. It's a signature of design. He lowered his voice. We think 3i Atlas is broadcasting a kind of harmonic key, something that interacts with matter on a quantum level. And when it enters a system like ours, he trailed off. Elena finished for him. It wakes something up. The room was silent except for the low hum of the terminal. Carter's face looked older in the harsh light. A few days after the web data came through, our ground sensors started picking up anomalies in the magnetosphere. Small at first, fluctuations that looked like solar interference, but they grew stronger every night. It was as if the planet itself was responding. He pulled another photo from the folder, a blurry frame from a space-based observatory. The green glow of 3i Atlas burned in the center. We traced one of the magnetic anomalies to a frequency nearly identical to the object's transmission. It wasn't just sending a signal, it was synchronizing one. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. With Earth? With the entire solar system, he said. Planetary magnetic fields, even solar flares, began to align with the timing of its pulses. It's subtle, but it's measurable. And if that pattern holds... He stopped himself, then added quietly, the resonance could be building towards something.
A trigger.
She turned away, her mind racing.
That's impossible.
How could one object affect the entire system?
It's not about force, Carter said. It's about coherence.
If you can tune enough energy into resonance with the right frequency, you don't need to push planets. You let physics do it for you. Elena looked at him in disbelief.
So what? NASA's afraid it'll set off some chain reaction.
He met her eyes. NASA doesn't know what it'll do.
That's what scares them.
He sat down heavily, his hands clasped. That's why they built the blackout network, to jam any unfiltered signal coming from Atlas. Every deep space dish now has a masking filter, just like the one they forced your receiver to install.
They're trying to silence it.
But you said it's still transmitting, she said. It is, he replied, but not through the channels they can block anymore. That's what you picked up near the tower. It switched frequencies. Elena swallowed. You mean it knows they're listening? Carter gave a slow, grim nod.
I think it knows everything.
The fog outside the windows had thickened, muffling the sound of the waves below. The hum in the air seemed to grow stronger. Faint but persistent, like a background tone that had always been there, unnoticed until now. Carter looked up.
You feel that?
She nodded slowly. It's the same frequency. He walked to the door, listening. It's getting stronger. They stepped outside. The mist glowed faintly, tinted with green. Above them, the night sky shimmered as if the stars themselves were breathing. Eleanor could see it now. A faint streak across the heavens, motionless, hovering in the distance. 3i Atlas, not moving.
Not drifting.
Just hanging there perfectly still, its light pulsing in slow rhythm. Carter whispered, "It's waiting for something." Elena's voice was barely audible. For us. The next morning, the entire coastline felt different. The air was heavier, filled with the static hum of something vast and unseen. The fog still clung to the cliffs, but through it, faint green glimmers shimmered like distant lightning. Elena woke to the sound of the sea against the rocks and the low vibration that had followed her, even into sleep. It wasn't loud, never was, but it was steady, patient, a pulse you could almost mistake for the beating of your own heart if you weren't paying attention. She sat up and realized she'd fallen asleep in the same chair beside the window, the folder of classified documents still open on her lap. Carter was gone. For a moment, she wondered if he had been real at all, a ghost of the agency, appearing and vanishing with the fog. But then she noticed something on the table, a small portable hard drive, a note taped to it in rough handwriting. "You were right to listen. Don't stop now." She turned the drive over in her hand. It was cold and scratched, the label partly torn. But when she plugged it into her laptop, offline, always offline, the screen lit with hundreds of files, audio, spectral data, photographs, some stamped with the NASA insignia, others redacted with thick black bars. At the top of the directory was one file simply named Truth. She clicked it. The recording began with the sound of wind, a microphone picking up open air, static, rustling softly like leaves. Then faintly a voice, male, calm, professional. "This is Dr. Thomas Green, Division 2, entry log March 26th.
Elena froze.
Thomas Green, the chief astrophysicist credited with the Webb telescope's deep field calibration system. He'd gone missing 6 months earlier. NASA said he'd retired. The voice continued.
"Atlas has stopped moving."
"It's been stationary now for 12 days. We've confirmed the emission pattern isn't random. It's accelerating exponentially, exactly 32.1 seconds per pulse. The amplitude doubles every cycle. We believe it's building toward a resonance event." A click, papers rustling, a deep sigh. "Command has ordered full data suppression. No further transmissions will be shared externally." The cover story, comet disintegration.
But that's not true.
It's not disintegrating. It's aligning. Elena's fingers trembled over the keyboard. Dr. Green's voice dropped to a whisper. "Whatever it is, it's not a rock. I'm aware." The audio crackled, then ended abruptly. Elena leaned back, heart pounding softly against her ribs. She stared out the window toward the ocean. The fog had begun to lift, and above the pale light of dawn, she could see it again. The faint shimmer of green in the high sky, like a second star that refused to move. She whispered under her breath, "It's waiting!" Her phone buzzed on the table.
Unknown number.
She hesitated, then answered.
"Elena," Carter's voice said quietly.
"You need to see something."
"Where are you?" "Outside."
"Turn on the TV, any channel." She fumbled for the remote. The screen blinked to life. Every news station was showing the same feed. Grainy, zoomed-in footage from multiple observatories. 3i Atlas, the glowing emerald object, had stopped between Mars and Earth's orbit. It was no longer on a hyperbolic escape path.
It wasn't leaving.
It had changed direction. The broadcast anchors were trying to stay calm, reading from their teleprompters in voices that wavered between disbelief and fear. NASA officials have yet to release a statement following confirmation that the interstellar object known as 3i Atlas has reduced velocity to near zero relative to the Sun. This is inconsistent with all previously known natural trajectories.
A scientist appeared on screen, his voice measured but tense.
Objects in hyperbolic orbits don't stop. This isn't possible without external force. It's as if something or someone applied brakes. Elena muted the television. Carter was standing by the window now, watching the sky with his arms folded. His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost beside hers. "It's responding to something," he said. "To what?" He turned toward her.
"To the signal you heard."
"The one you decoded." She blinked. "But I stopped transmitting." "You didn't have to," he said. "Once you opened the frequency, it had a line back." She felt her stomach twist. "You're saying it's listening," he finished, "and it's using you to find its voice again." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The low hum filled the silence between their breaths. Then, from the harbor below, sirens began to wail. A cluster of fishing boats drifted toward shore, their radios flickering with green static. Across the town, power lines buzzed, and the streetlights flickered out in unison. The sound wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, an invisible tremor spreading through the air. Elena stepped outside. The sky had turned faintly emerald, as if someone had washed it with light from beneath. Clouds shimmered in soft rings that pulsed in rhythm with the hum. The ocean itself glowed faintly where the waves met the rocks, each crest flashing green like liquid glass. Carter followed her, shielding his eyes. "It's broadcasting wideband now," he said. "Every frequency at once."
"Is that even possible?"
she asked. He gave a hollow laugh. "It shouldn't be. But neither should it be here." The wind shifted, carrying the sound like a chorus of whispers. And then through the layers of static came a voice.
Not synthetic, not human.
Something deeper, resonant, layered with tones that made the air itself vibrate. It spoke only 3 words. "We have arrived," but the entire world heard it. Within hours, every communication satellite was flooded with interference. Television broadcasts, radio, cell towers all carried the same phrase, repeating on loop, each in a slightly different tone. Governments issued statements urging calm. NASA went silent. And everywhere, people stepped outside at night to watch the green light hanging above the sky, the not comet that had come from another star and chosen to stay. Some said it was a vessel. Some said it was a signal. Some said it was an awakening. Elena watched it from the cliffs, her notebook clutched against her chest. Carter stood beside her, silent. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. He looked at the horizon. "Now we wait."
"Either for answers?"
He turned to her, eyes tired but bright, and for them to ask the next question. The hum deepened. The stars shimmered faintly in waves. Somewhere high above, beyond clouds and atmosphere, the green light pulsed once, long and slow, like a heartbeat the size of a planet. And for the first time in human history, something in the dark was no longer watching. It was listening back. Days passed, and the world learned to live beneath the green light.
It didn't move anymore.
It hovered at a fixed point above the solar plane, steady and still, casting a faint glow that painted the night sky with soft hues of emerald and silver. People stopped calling it a comet. Even the networks that once mocked the idea began to whisper other names. Some said it was a probe. Some called it the Watcher.
Others, the Listener.
NASA at first maintained silence. Then, on the 3rd day, they spoke. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't even a live broadcast. It was a pre-recorded message distributed to all major channels at once. The administrator stood before the agency's insignia, hands clasped, voice calm but distant, the kind of tone used when the truth was heavier than the air itself. The object known as 3I Atlas is no longer behaving according to any known natural or physical model, he said. All available evidence suggests an artificial origin. We do not yet understand its purpose, but we are continuing communication protocols in accordance with established contingency plans. He hesitated just for a breath. Please know this, we have not been hiding its nature. We have been studying it carefully for your safety. And then the feed ended.
No questions, no answers. Only that quiet admission, artificial origin.
Elena watched the message from her small, rented room overlooking the coast. The window was open, and the air smelled of salt and electricity. Carter sat on the floor, papers spread around him like fallen leaves.
"So they finally said it," she murmured.
He nodded, in their own way. "What happens now?" "Now?" he said. "The rest of the world starts to ask the same questions you did months ago." She leaned against the frame of the window. "They'll never tell them everything, will they?" He shook his head.
"No, but they'll tell just enough to keep people calm."
"They always do." She turned her gaze to the horizon. The green shimmer had softened, stretching across the upper atmosphere like a translucent veil. At night, it made the stars look dimmer, their light swallowed by something older, something patient.
It was beautiful and terrifying in the same breath.
The next evening, something changed. Not in the sky, but on Earth. Across multiple continents, magnetic compasses began to drift. Power grids flickered. In some regions, satellites lost orientation, spinning slowly out of alignment. And yet, the world remained calm. It wasn't destruction, it was more like a quiet recalibration. Carter and Elena drove inland, away from the coast, toward a decommissioned observatory perched on a hill. It had been closed for a decade, but its instruments still worked. Carter had arranged access through old contacts, people who still believed in truth more than authority. When they reached the dome, the night was perfectly clear. The stars burned faintly against the backdrop of green. The telescope's mirror had dust on it, but it aligned perfectly with a few careful adjustments. Elena peered through the eyepiece, focusing on 3i Atlas. "It's changed," she whispered. The surface wasn't smooth anymore. What had once looked like a glowing sphere now revealed fine structures, lines and lattices, faint but geometric.
"It's opening," she said.
Carter joined her. "We thought it was a comet, then a machine, but maybe it's something in between, like not built, not born."
"Something has grown."
She pulled away from the eyepiece, eyes wide. "Grown?" He nodded slowly. "You've seen coral, right? How it builds itself out of repetition, tiny organisms layering over centuries, forming something vast and alive. What if Atlas is like that, but made of elements instead of cells?" Elena stared at him. "A living machine?" He shrugged. "The universe is old enough to make strange things." They watched through the telescope as the green light pulsed again, this time in a sequence. 3 long flashes, 2 short, 1 long. Elena glanced at the readouts. "It's repeating." "Try translating it," Carter said. She scribbled the pattern down, 3, 2, 1, then paused. "It's a countdown." He frowned. "What?" She looked back into the eyepiece, to a transmission. The pulse brightened. The monitors in the observatory came alive. Every screen, every instrument. The frequency spiked beyond any human broadcast band. For a few seconds, the air itself seemed to hum with invisible energy. And then, through the speakers, came a sound unlike any they had ever heard. It wasn't noisy. It wasn't words. It was like listening to wind, shaped into meaning. Tones woven together, harmonics that stirred something in the chest more than in the mind. Elena closed her eyes.
"It's not a message," she whispered. "It's memory."
The sound filled the observatory, rising and falling in a rhythm older than language. Images flickered across the monitors, strange landscapes, alien seas, skies filled with unfamiliar stars. And then faces by not human, but graceful, translucent beings formed of light and dust. They weren't solid, but they moved with purpose, their gestures calm, their eyes deep and endless. "They're showing us what they were," Carter murmured. The voice that followed was faint, layered, like the memory of a dream speaking back. "We were made from silence. We crossed the void to find the echo." The words vibrated through the air, soft yet vast.
"We listened to your world before you learned to listen to yourselves."
"You built voices and sent them into the dark. We followed them home." Elena's breath trembled. "They're talking about Voyager," the voice continued. "We found your song in the emptiness. We carried it with us to remember what warmth sounds like." And then, for a moment, everything went still. The green light in the sky dimmed to a pale glow, almost white. The voice spoke again, slower now, as if fading. "Your kind sent a message to the stars.
Now the stars are answering."
The transmission ended as suddenly as it began. The observatory fell silent, save for the faint ticking of cooling metal. Carter sat down heavily on the floor, staring at the blank monitors. "So that's it?"
"That's the proof."
Elena nodded, eyes distant. "It's not proof of a lie. It's proof of something bigger." He looked at her. "Do you think NASA knew?" She smiled faintly. "They knew enough to be afraid, but they didn't understand what they were afraid of." Carter leaned back, exhaling slowly.
"And what about you?" "I'm not afraid," she said softly. "I think we just met our reflection."
Outside, the stars flickered faintly beneath the green veil. Somewhere above, 3i Atlas pulsed once more. Slow, deliberate, almost like a breath. And in that silent rhythm, the Earth seemed to answer back. For days after the transmission, nothing else came. No light, no signal.
No sound. The green glow that had spread across the upper sky softened until it became barely visible, a pale mist that shimmered faintly in moonlight.
The world didn't know what to do with the silence. For the first time in a long time, there was no argument, No demand for proof, only stillness. NASA released a single-page statement. It said nothing new, only that communications with the interstellar object known as 3I Atlas have ceased, and that further study is ongoing. But the world had already moved past the official story. In villages, cities, deserts, and mountaintops, people kept watching the sky. Radio enthusiasts replayed the strange sound, trying to decode it. Scientists ran new simulations, trying to replicate what they saw.
None of them could.
None of them could even agree on what exactly had happened. And yet, quietly, something began to change. Elena returned to the observatory every night. She couldn't stay away. She would climb the hill long after sunset, carrying her notebook, a small radio, and a thermos of tea. The dome creaked when she pushed it open, and the cold air always bit her cheeks. But when she sat under the telescope, she felt at peace. The screens were still dark. The equipment was quiet. But somehow the place didn't feel empty. She would sit there, sometimes for hours, writing not equations or readings, but feelings, things she couldn't explain with numbers. Words like echo, warmth, memory. One night she wrote something and stopped to read it aloud. They weren't looking for us. They were listening for the ones who could listen back. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Then she heard it, the faintest hum, like static. It came from the receiver near the wall, a soft pulse, slow and rhythmic, matching the timing of her breath. Elena leaned closer. The pattern repeated, 3 long, 2 short, 1 long. She smiled.
"You're still there," she whispered.
The sound faded again, but that didn't matter. It was enough. Elsewhere, NASA scientists had begun comparing archived data, not from this year, but from decades past. A young researcher named Kieran found something strange buried deep in the Voyager mission logs. There were gaps in the telemetry, not random ones, but evenly spaced interruptions. The timestamps matched the moments Voyager had crossed the outer edge of the heliopause, the boundary where the sun's influence ends and interstellar space begins. Each gap lasted exactly 72 seconds. It was the same length as the WOW signal, and in those 72 seconds, there was nothing. No noise, no interference, just blankness. As if the spacecraft had entered a place where even the background of the universe went silent. Kieran showed it to his supervisor, who sent it up the chain. Within hours, the logs disappeared from the public database, but copies had already spread. People were beginning to put the pieces together. Carter, meanwhile, had started writing again.
Not the way he used to when he worked for the agency.
His writing now was different. Not about data or trajectories, but about meaning. He published a short essay called The Space Between Signals. It began simply, maybe the greatest lie NASA ever told wasn't about what they found.
Maybe it was about what they couldn't admit they didn't understand.
The essay went viral.
Not because it was rebellious, but because it was honest.
It didn't accuse anyone. It didn't shout. It just asked questions, the kind that echoed softly in the reader's mind, like the hum of distant stars. By the end of the week, Carter was invited to speak at an international science forum. He refused the cameras. He asked for the lights to be dimmed. When he spoke, his voice carried the same calm wonder that had once filled those observatory nights. He said, "We've spent our whole history asking the sky for answers. Maybe the sky's been asking us questions too." And for the first time, the room of scientists fell completely silent, not in disagreement, but in something like reverence. The following month, an anomaly was detected in the same region where 3I Atlas had last been seen.
Not a comet, not a flare. Something slower.
It wasn't moving toward Earth, it was moving around it, orbiting just beyond the moon. The signal was faint, nearly impossible to detect through the interference of the magnetosphere. But its pulse rate was unmistakable. 3 long, 2 short, 1 long. Elena was the first to recognize it. She was sitting under the open dome again when the telescope's sensor blinked once, then twice, then paused. A rhythm, a heartbeat.
"They're still here," she murmured.
She turned on the receiver and began to record. The hum grew louder, steadier, until it filled the room like the sound of a distant sea. Then came a whisper. Not through the speakers, but in the air itself, so faint that she could barely tell if it was real or just her mind filling the silence. "We are waiting." Her pulse slowed. "For what?" she whispered.
No answer came,
Only that soft vibration fading into the wind. That night, Elena didn't go home. She stayed beneath the stars until dawn, eyes fixed on the pale curve of the moon. Somewhere beyond it, the visitor lingered, silent, patient, as if watching. Carter arrived in the morning, bringing coffee and the newspaper. The front page was blank, except for 3 words. "The sky is listening." He sat beside her. "You saw it again?" She nodded. "It's still sending signals."
Quieter now.
He leaned back against the wall, eyes half closed. "Maybe it's waiting for us to answer." She looked at him. "And how do we do that?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe we already have." The world went on. Planes still flew. Cities still buzzed. Children still laughed and chased fireflies. But above it all, there was a new awareness. That somewhere out there, just beyond the reach of what we could see, someone was watching back. It wasn't fear. It wasn't awesome. It was something gentler. A strange comfort, knowing that the universe wasn't empty after all. For all of human history, we had been sending messages to the stars. And now perhaps we have finally received one. It didn't come in a language we could read or a sound we could measure. It came as a feeling, a reminder that maybe we were never as alone as we thought. As the sun rose, Elena packed her notes and stepped outside. The air was cool, and the last trace of green light faded into daylight. She turned toward the horizon, where the sky met the sea, and whispered to no one in particular. "If you're listening, thank you." The wind carried her voice upward, soft and weightless, lost among the same waves of radiation that drifted through the vacuum, rippling outward into eternity. And somewhere, perhaps, something heard. The world never found an ending to the story of Three-Eye Atlas. It simply became part of the background, like the faint hum behind a song you've known all your life, but never quite noticed.
Months passed.
The news moved on. The signal faded from the headlines, then from memory, until it was mentioned only by a handful of skywatchers who still whispered to the stars before they slept. Yet in quiet corners, observatories, attics, rooftops, lonely stations in the desert, people still listened. Not because they expected another message, but because listening itself had become the point. One evening, Elena sat on the same worn hill where she had first seen the green glow. The air was cool enough that her breath fogged in front of her. She had no telescope this time, no instruments, only a small notebook resting on her knees. Carter was beside her, older, slower, carrying a radio he had repaired just for the ritual of it. The static murmured softly, like distant rain. They said very little. There was nothing left to prove. Elena tilted her head back, spoke the question that had been resting at the back of her mind for years.
"Do you think it was ever really here?"
Carter smiled, faint lines deepening around his eyes.
"I think here is larger than we ever thought."
She nodded. The stars shimmered above them, hundreds of pinpoints trembling in the dark. Somewhere in that infinity, one might have been the path Three-Eye Atlas had taken when it arrived, or when it left. And perhaps, she thought, it hadn't left at all. Perhaps it had simply turned invisible, hiding between the wavelengths of light and thought, waiting for another generation to notice. The world's space agencies eventually agreed on a new designation for the anomaly, not a comet, not a ship, simply an unknown interstellar artifact. It was the safest possible phrase. But in smaller papers and quiet podcasts, people still called it the listener. They said that when you were alone, somewhere far from city lights, and you let your mind go very still, you could feel it. A pulse in the quiet. Some said it came every 72 seconds.
Others said it was constant, like the rhythm of the human heart.
No one ever agreed on what it meant. And maybe that was the secret. Meaning wasn't the message. Awareness was. Years later, Elena's notebook was found in the observatory after she had passed. The final page held only a few lines written in small, steady handwriting. They taught us that silence is not empty. It is filled with waiting. It is the sound of the universe listening back. The paper smelled faintly of tea and dust. When the archivist read it aloud, everyone in the room fell quiet. The words seemed to stretch beyond the page, as if the air itself had paused to hear them. A generation after that, a small satellite built by students was launched into orbit. It wasn't funded by any major agency, and it carried no cameras, no expensive sensors, only a transmitter. Every 72 seconds it sent out a single, simple pulse at the hydrogen line frequency. They called it Echo 1. When asked what message it was sending, the students answered, "None. We're just saying hello." The satellite is still out there, tracing its circle around the Earth, whispering into the dark. And maybe, somewhere far beyond the edge of the solar wind, something hears it and smiles if smiling is something stars can do.
As for NASA, it never confessed to hiding anything.
It didn't need to. Maybe all the secrecy and the half-truths were never about control, but about the fear of saying we don't know. Humans don't like the unknown. Yet it's where all wonder lives. When you look up tonight, you might catch yourself wondering what else is out there. Maybe a drifting piece of rock. Maybe a silent ship made of metal older than our sun. Maybe only the reflection of our own longing reaching outward. Whatever it is, it keeps us looking. And that perhaps is proof enough that something has changed us. Carter once said in an interview long after the world had moved on, the biggest discovery wasn't the object itself. It was realizing that wonder still exists, that we can still be surprised. His words stayed with people. They softened the fear and turned it into curiosity again.
Because maybe NASA didn't lie.
Maybe we all did. To ourselves, when we pretended the sky was silent. Now as you breathe, imagine that you're standing beneath that same endless sky. The air is cool. The world is quiet. Each breath slows a little more. Above you, there are billions of points of light. Some are stars you'll never visit. Some are stories waiting to be told. And somewhere among them, maybe, drifts a faint green shimmer, still listening. You don't have to reach it. You don't have to understand it. Just know it's there and that it knows you're here too. Let that thought settle. Let it grow softer, like the fading hum of a radio signal. Let it drift until it becomes the rhythm of your own heartbeat. And as your eyes grow heavy, remember this. The universe isn't a secret to be solved. It's a lullaby, and we are part of the song.